Game one was kind of a crazy back and forth. The Wizards jumped on the Celtics early. We're up 16-zippy, 22-5, had a big lead. Celtics had a huge third quarter. Wizards kind of fought back there in the fourth, but then the Celtics pulled away late. How do you see game two playing out?
Well, look, the Wizards are going to need to play better defense. That's where it's going to start. You guys have watched them probably, enough the second half of the year to understand that's the issue. I expect this series, given the way both teams play defense, that we're going to see some games in the high 100s, the low 110s. But if you're going to let the Celtics, or if the Wizards are going to let the Celtics get into the 120s, then it's going to be really difficult. And the one interesting thing I saw when I was, taking a little deeper dive into that game is that the Celtics had nearly 53 uncontested field goal attempts. That's just way too many. Jay Crowder was 7 for 10 on uncontested shots. And, I understand that's going to happen. The defense does break down, but they're going to need to get out on shooters, especially at the three-point line. I know people don't expect the team to shoot 50% from three every game, which was what the Celtics did. And yet, if you're going to give up open shots, NBA players can knock those down.
But you're right, Jeff. We have watched them all year, and they've been bad all year. And I just can't imagine them just flipping a switch and getting better, overnight. I just don't see it. Now, they kind of have to hope Boston just shoots poorly with those open looks. That's the way I look at it.
And almost the same way I'm looking at this Cleveland-Toronto series, sometimes defense is not going to win you the game, and you have to outscore the other team. And maybe that's what it comes down to for the Wizards in this one, is they're just going to need to outscore the Celtics and maybe take a deeper look also into what the Chicago Bulls did in games 1 and 2 of that series, because they did pick apart the Celtics, especially with Rondo running the point. I thought, and again, I know there was a lot more action with Gortat in game 1 than there was in the previous series against the Hawks, but they're going to need to find ways to exploit that defense. We know Boston they're not great defensive rebounding team. They're not one of the top defenses in the league. And so those are ways that the Wizards offense, I know we just talked about playing some better defense, and yet there's part of me that, get Wall and Beal out in a little bit more, get them some more offensive situations, involve some of the other players. And I do believe that Marquise Morris's presence in the lineup is going to be key in game 2 if he plays.
Yeah, what are we hearing on him?
Well, he's saying he's playing. He says there's no doctor that's going to stop him.
Yeah.
And that's funny, because every time I'm at a Wizards practice or shoot-around, Scott Brooks is pretty adamant is that it comes down to him talking with the training staff, the player, and then everyone makes a decision. But at this time of the year, if he says he's able to go with a foot problem and it's healing, and he says no one's stopping him, there's probably a better chance that he plays than he doesn't play.
He's got to play.
By the way, the Celtics launched 40 threes, and at least in the first round, the Celtics shot more threes than even the Rockets and Golden State. I mean, the Rockets shot 50 last night, so, they've actually become a team that shoots even more threes than during the regular season, where they were third in the NBA.
Look, that's part of the one thing I do notice about the Celtics and Brad Stevens is they are going to move the ball. That's a team that I think they're one of the top assist teams in the playoffs. They have more passes per game than almost any team except the only team that passes the ball more is the Golden State Warriors. So they are going to make you work on defense. There's no doubt about that, and they have some versatility to put their bigs on the perimeter. They do make it difficult, and yet we saw, Chicago was able to do some things that takes away what Boston does. And the one, thing you're talking about on the threes, and I know Brad Stevens said this late in the Chicago series and maybe even just before the Wizards series, is that he felt, water rises to the level where it's supposed to be. Now, again, they're not going to shoot 50%, and 19 threes is a lot. I mean, I think Cleveland was at the top of the league with about 13 and a half made threes per game during the regular season. If you even keep Boston a little close to that, then that's a whole different game as well.
Wanted to get your opinion on John Wall, as we talked to Jeff Zillgitt from the USA Today. Was having this discussion the other day about where John Wall is seen in the league, and kind of fast forwarding to next year, with what he did in the Hawks series, is he going to elevate himself into MVP consideration?
I think he is. And again, in this way, so number one, he was on one of my all-NBA teams. So right off the top, I think he's one of the top 6 guards in the league. And then beyond that, and you have to vote for a center this year, and I'm not always a fan of doing that because I don't think we're accurately getting the top 15 players. So remove those 3 centers from the list, and now I'm looking at John as, a top 10, top 12 player. And even during the course of the season, when we do our little MVP rankings at USA Today, sometimes I had John in my top 5 this year. The way the guy is able to score. My favorite John Wall, I've said this, is when John's probably close to 20 points and 14 assists per game, he's got a couple steals, maybe a block, and he's engaged defensively.